The cleaning rag trembled in Emily's hand as she wiped the already spotless mirror, her reflection distorted by the faint streaks she couldn't seem to erase. Her heart raced, pounding so loud she was certain someone would hear it. She could still hear Amanda's cold, calculated whisper echoing in her head. He'll never see it coming. This will be the last trip he ever takes. The words had crawled under her skin, freezing her blood. She wasn't supposed to hear that. She was just the help, silent, invisible, unnoticed. But now, she knew too much. Too much to walk away, too much to forget. Her eyes darted to the grand door of the hotel suite. At any moment, someone could walk in. Amanda, her lover, or worse, James Wilson himself. The man who was about to walk into a death trap without knowing it. Her fingers went numb around the rag. She couldn't let it happen. But how could she warn him? A nobody like her, warning a man like James? He probably didn't even know her name. Her mind spun, logic fighting with fear. She could keep quiet, stay safe, stay out of this mess. After all, this wasn't her world. But no, she couldn't do that. Not when someone's life was at stake. Not even if he was a billionaire who probably thought of her as part of the furniture. The decision crashed into her, heavy and suffocating. She would have to do it. Somehow, she would have to find a way to warn him. Even if it meant risking everything. She put the rag down, her fingers trembling. She couldn't do it here. Too risky. Amanda or her accomplice could walk in at any moment. No, she'd have to wait. Wait until he was alone, away from his entourage, away from his wife. A shiver ran down her spine. What if Amanda knew she'd overheard? Would they come after her too? She looked at her reflection, pale and wide-eyed, a stranger looking back at her. She wasn't brave. She was just a maid, struggling to pay rent, invisible to the people she served. But she had to be brave now. The hotel lobby was bustling when she saw him the next morning, surrounded by assistants, his phone glued to his ear. James Wilson, larger than life, powerful, untouchable. Her stomach flipped as she watched him. How could she approach him? How could she get him to listen? Her pulse raced, legs rooted to the floor. She couldn't do this. He'd laugh at her, dismiss her as crazy, or worse, Amanda would find out. But then she remembered Amanda's voice, dripping with malice. Make sure it looks like an accident. Clean. Untraceable. She took a deep breath, forcing her legs to move. Her shoes felt heavy, sinking into the plush carpet with each step. The world blurred around her, her focus locked on James. She was only a few feet away when one of his assistants stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her smile polite but eyes cold. Emily's mouth went dry. She couldn't back out now. I need to speak with Mr. Wilson," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The assistant's eyebrows knitted together. "Regarding?" Panic surged through her. What could she say? That his wife was plotting his murder? That she overheard everything while dusting his nightstand? He'd think she was insane. But she had no choice. It was now or never. It's about his trip," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, it's important." The assistant's frown deepened, but before she could shoo Emily away, James looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto her. "What about my trip?" His voice was calm but curious, his gaze piercing. Emily's heart stopped. He was listening. He was actually listening. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. She had to say it. She had to warn him, even if it made no sense, even if he thought she was crazy. "Don't go," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "Please, don't go on that trip. Something bad, something terrible will happen." James's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening. For a moment, the world fell silent, the hotel lobby fading away. It was just her and him, locked in this impossible moment. "Why should I listen to you?" he asked, his voice low, guarded. Emily's throat tightened. She had no proof, no explanation, nothing but the words she heard through a cracked door. But she knew, deep in her bones, that this was the only chance to save him. "Because if you don't," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you won't come back alive." The words hung heavy in the air, fear and desperation woven into every syllable. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw fear flash in his eyes, but then his expression hardened. "I don't make decisions based on nonsense," he said coldly, turning away, his entourage moving with him like a shield. Emily's heart shattered, her warning echoing in her mind. It wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. But as she watched him disappear into the crowd, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just changed everything. Emily was used to being invisible. She moved through the grand corridors of the luxury hotel like a shadow, her presence unnoticed, her footsteps silent on the polished marble floors. The air was always heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and freshly cut flowers, a world so distant from her own that it felt like stepping into a dream each morning. For over 2 years, she had worked here, scrubbing away the traces of the rich and powerful, erasing their presence as if they never existed. Her hands were calloused, her back constantly aching, but the money kept her afloat. Just enough to pay rent for her tiny, dim apartment on the outskirts of the city. Just enough to keep food on the table. No one looked at her. Not really. They glanced her way, their eyes sliding past her like she was part of the decor, no different than the crystal chandeliers or the marble columns. She was just a maid, another nameless face in a sea of service staff. But Emily didn't mind. Invisibility came with its own perks. She was free to observe, to listen, to blend into the background without anyone paying her a second thought. She knew more about these guests than they could ever imagine. Their secrets were scattered across the rooms she cleaned, hidden in half-read letters, discarded receipts, or whispered phone calls they thought were private. That morning, she pushed her cleaning cart down the long, plush hallway of the penthouse floor. Room 3209, the suite of James Wilson, one of the wealthiest men in the city. The billionaire who owned half the skyscrapers in downtown, whose name was plastered on every business magazine in the country. She had never seen him up close, only caught glimpses of his tall figure surrounded by assistants, his sharp eyes always focused, his expression impenetrable. He was a man who seemed untouchable, living in a world Emily could only see through the glimmering surfaces she polished every day. She knocked twice, her voice low, practiced. Housekeeping. Silence. She slid the keycard through the door, the lock clicking softly as she pushed it open. The suite was massive, sprawling across the entire floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a painting. Everything was pristine, as if untouched by human hands. Emily moved with purpose, her body on autopilot as she began her routine. Dust, vacuum, change the sheets. Each movement precise, practiced, efficient. She could do this in her sleep. As she dusted the nightstand, something caught her attention. Voices, muffled but sharp, coming from the adjoining room. Emily froze, her hand hovering over a crystal vase. Guests were never supposed to be in the suite when she was cleaning. That was the rule. She should leave. She knew that. But something about the voices made her hesitate. They were hushed, tense, the words clipped and hurried. She took a step closer to the door, her ear almost pressing against the wood. He'll never see it coming. This will be the last trip he ever takes. The voice was cold, female, dripping with calculated malice. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She recognized that voice. Amanda. James Wilson's wife. She had seen her in passing before, beautiful, elegant, the picture of sophistication. But there was nothing elegant about her voice now. A man's voice responded, low and steady. We need to be careful. No mistakes this time. Emily's blood ran cold. She knew that tone. She had heard it before in the whispered conversations of criminals, the dangerous ones who spoke in codes and half-truths. This wasn't just gossip or a lover's quarrel. This was something much darker. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. She needed to leave. If they found out she was here, if they realized she had heard. But her legs refused to move. She was rooted to the spot, the weight of their words sinking in. They were planning something terrible. And James Wilson, the untouchable billionaire, was the target. Her mind raced. She could pretend she heard nothing. She could finish her work, leave the room, and go back to her life of scrubbing floors and blending into the background. But could she live with herself knowing she had stayed silent while a man was being marked for death? They wouldn't believe her. She was just a maid, just the help. People like Amanda didn't even notice people like her. And if they did believe her, Amanda and her accomplice might come after her. People who planned murder didn't hesitate to get rid of loose ends. Her hands trembled, the rags slipping from her fingers and landing soundlessly on the plush carpet. She was just a nobody. But she was a nobody who knew the truth. And she couldn't walk away from that. She took a shaky breath, her mind made up. She would warn him. She didn't know how, and she didn't know if he would even listen, but she had to try. Because someone's life was on the line, and she couldn't let fear make her a bystander. As she picked up the rag and continued cleaning, her movements were mechanical, her mind racing with possibilities. She would have to be careful. She would have to be smart. And she would have to be brave. For the first time in her life, she would have to be seen. Emily knew she should have left. She knew she was already in too deep. But her feet were rooted to the spot, her ear pressed against the door, heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. She heard Amanda's voice again, low and calculated, dripping with contempt. Make sure it looks like an accident. I don't want any loose ends. A man's voice responded, his tone cold and commanding. He'll be gone before he even knows what hit him. But we can't afford any mistakes. Not this time. Emily's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a plot. It was a murder. And the target was James Wilson. Her mind reeled, struggling to make sense of what she had just heard. She tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. Amanda, his wife, was planning to kill him. And she wasn't doing it alone. The man. Who was he? She racked her brain, trying to remember his voice, but she had never heard it before. But there was something familiar about the way Amanda spoke to him, comfortable, intimate. It wasn't business. It was personal. Then it hit her. She had heard Amanda talking on the phone before, laughing softly, her voice playful, teasing. Ryan, you're incorrigible. Don't make me wait too long. Ryan. The name echoed in her mind, connecting the dots she didn't want to see. Amanda wasn't just planning to kill James. She was doing it with her lover. Her stomach turned, the reality of the situation settling in. It was betrayal at the deepest level. The man who trusted her, who provided her with a life of luxury and status, and she was plotting his death to be with someone else. Emily felt sick. But more than that, she felt terrified. She was just a maid, someone who was supposed to be invisible. But now she knew a secret that could get her killed. Her fingers trembled, gripping the edge of the nightstand as she tried to steady herself. She had to get out of there before they realized she was listening. She took a step back, her foot catching the edge of the vacuum cleaner. It tipped over, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The voices stopped. Panic surged through her. She grabbed the vacuum, forcing her hands to steady, and resumed her cleaning, pretending she hadn't heard anything. Her movements were mechanical, her mind racing. The door to the adjoining room opened. Emily's heart stopped. Amanda's heels clicked against the marble floor as she stepped out, her face calm, composed, her eyes scanning the room. For a terrifying moment, their eyes met. Emily's throat went dry. Did she know? Did she hear? Amanda's lips curved into a polite smile, the kind she reserved for the help. "Oh, I didn't realize you were here. You're very quiet, aren't you?" Emily's mouth moved, but no words came out. She forced herself to look down, a submissive gesture she had perfected over the years. I'm almost done, ma'am. I'll be out of your way in just a moment." Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. She lingered for a moment longer, her gaze cold and calculating, before turning away. "Make sure you don't miss any spots. Mr. Wilson likes his room spotless." She walked out, her heels echoing down the hallway, leaving Emily trembling in her wake. As soon as she was alone, Emily's legs buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her head spinning. She could still feel Amanda's gaze, sharp and suspicious, burning into her. Did she know? Did she suspect anything? Her hands shook as she finished cleaning, her body on autopilot, her mind racing with fear and questions. What was she supposed to do? Go to the police? Tell someone? But who would believe her? She was just a maid. Just the help. And even if they did believe her, Amanda and Ryan would come after her. They were clearly ruthless, willing to kill for what they wanted. A maid who overheard their plan wouldn't be an obstacle for long. Emily looked at her reflection in the mirror, pale and wide-eyed, a stranger looking back at her. She was insignificant, invisible. But that was her only weapon. They didn't see her. They didn't know who she was. She could disappear into the background like she always did. She could pretend she heard nothing, go back to her life of scrubbing floors and changing sheets. But could she live with herself knowing she stayed silent while a man was murdered? Her chest tightened, her conscience battling with her fear. She didn't know James Wilson anything. He probably didn't even know she existed. But no one deserved to die like that. No one deserved to be betrayed by the person they loved. By the time she finished cleaning the suite, her decision was made. She wouldn't stay silent. She couldn't. She had to warn him, even if it meant risking her own life. But she would have to be careful. Amanda and Ryan were dangerous, and they clearly didn't leave loose ends. If they found out she knew, they wouldn't hesitate to get rid of her. She had to find a way to warn James without giving herself away. She had to be smart, and she had to be brave. For once in her life, she had to be seen. She walked out of the suite, her head held high, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She was just a maid. But today, she would be his only chance. The hotel lobby buzzed with the morning rush, suits and heels clicking across the marble floors, voices low and hurried, the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. But to Emily, The world felt muted, distant, like she was moving through a fog. Her heart pounded, her pulse racing with fear and determination. She saw him. James Wilson, standing by the concierge desk, his posture straight, his presence commanding, surrounded by his usual entourage of assistants and security. He looked untouchable, powerful, every inch the billionaire who ruled this world of glass and marble. Her hands were shaking. She had one shot at this. One chance to save his life. Her feet felt like lead as she crossed the lobby, her steps slow, deliberate. She was painfully aware of her uniform, her plain black shoes, the cleaning rag she had forgotten to put down, still clenched in her fist. She was just a maid. Invisible, insignificant. Why would he listen to her? But she had to try. She had to. Mr. Wilson. Her voice wavered, barely rising above the hum of the lobby. No one heard her. No one looked her way. She took another step, her pulse hammering in her chest. Mr. Wilson. This time, her voice was louder, cracking with urgency. Heads turned. Faces she recognized, faces she had seen 1,000 times without them ever seeing her. James looked up, his eyes narrowing as they landed on her. For a moment, he looked almost surprised, as if he had never realized she existed before this moment. His security moved forward, blocking her path. One of the guards stepped in front of her, his expression hard. "Step back. You can't approach Mr. Wilson." Panic surged through her, her mouth going dry. She had to reach him. She had to make him listen. "Please, it's about his trip. He can't go. Something terrible is going to happen." The guard's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" I'm just the maid," she stammered, her voice shaking. "But I heard something. Please, he's in danger." The guard's hand moved to his earpiece, his posture tense. Security breach in the lobby. Unauthorized approach. No. This was going wrong. He wasn't going to listen. No one was going to listen. But then James spoke, his voice calm, steady. "Let her through." The guards hesitated, their eyes flicking to him, uncertain. But James's gaze was fixed on Emily, his expression unreadable. He raised a hand, a small gesture of authority, and the security team parted, giving her space. Emily's legs felt weak as she stepped forward, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. He was looking at her, really looking at her, his sharp eyes scanning her face, taking in her trembling hands, the fear etched into every line of her expression. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone neutral, guarded. "Why are you telling me not to go?" Emily's mouth went dry. How could she explain this? How could she make him believe her? She was just the maid. He didn't even know her name. But she had no choice. She had to make him understand. I overheard something," she said, her voice cracking. "Yesterday, when I was cleaning your suite. I heard your wife, she was talking to someone. She's planning something. Something terrible. If you go on that trip, you won't come back." For a heartbeat, his expression didn't change. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of composure, his eyes locked on hers. Then a muscle tightened in his jaw, his posture stiffening. "That's a serious accusation," he said, his voice cold. "You expect me to believe that my wife is plotting to kill me, and you just happened to overhear it?" Emily's throat tightened. He didn't believe her. Why would he? She was just the maid, someone who blended into the background, someone he probably never even noticed before today. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know it sounds crazy. But I heard them. She was with a man. Ryan. They were talking about your trip, about making it look like an accident. They're planning to kill you. You can't go. Please, you have to believe me. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, doubt, fear, she couldn't tell. But then his expression hardened, his shoulders squaring as he straightened, his jaw clenched tight. I don't make decisions based on nonsense from strangers, he said, his voice clipped, dismissive. Especially not from the help. The words cut through her like a knife, cold and sharp. She felt her face flush with shame, her hands shaking as she fought back tears. He didn't believe her. Of course he didn't. He turned away, his entourage closing in around him, their voices low and cautious, shielding him from her. But just before he walked away, he hesitated. His head turned, his eyes meeting hers one last time. His expression was cold, distant, but there was something else there too. Curiosity. Doubt. I'll think about it, he said, his voice low, before disappearing into the crowd. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding as she watched him leave. That was it. That was her only chance. She had done everything she could. But as she turned away, a cold wave of fear washed over her. What if Amanda had seen her? What if Ryan found out she warned him? She had stepped out of the shadows, made herself visible. And that meant she was no longer safe. The morning sun filtered through the dusty window of Emily's tiny apartment, its golden light starkly contrasting the cold fear coiled in her stomach. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Her mind raced with the echoes of Amanda's words, the chilling certainty that James Wilson was walking into a death trap. She had done everything she could. She had warned him, pleaded with him not to go. But would he listen? Would he even remember her face? She was just the maid, the invisible woman who cleaned his suite, erased his presence without leaving a trace of her own. Her phone buzzed on the table, jarring her from her thoughts. It was her supervisor from the hotel. Emily, don't come in today. Mr. Wilson canceled his trip. Something came up. We'll need you tomorrow instead. Her heart skipped a beat. He canceled his trip. He listened. Relief flooded through her, followed swiftly by a cold wave of fear. Did Amanda know? Did Ryan suspect? If they realized she was the one who warned him? She couldn't finish the thought. Her hands shook as she put the phone down. It was over. For now. But the next morning, a car was waiting for her. She froze at the sight of it, a sleek, black luxury sedan, gleaming under the morning sun. It looked so out of place on her rundown street, surrounded by cracked sidewalks and faded brick buildings. Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. They knew. Amanda and Ryan knew. They were here to silence her. The car door opened, and a man in a sharp black suit stepped out, his movements precise, calculated. He walked toward her with purpose, his eyes fixed on her, unblinking. She couldn't breathe. Her legs felt like lead, rooted to the crumbling pavement. Run. Her mind screamed, but her body refused to move. Miss Emily? His voice was calm, his tone polite, almost warm. It didn't match the cold determination in his eyes. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. This was it. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, every instinct screaming that she was about to die. The man reached into his jacket. Emily's muscles tensed, her body bracing for the impact, the pain, the end. But instead, he pulled out a white envelope, pristine and crisp, her name written on it in elegant script. "This is for you," he said, extending the envelope toward her. She stared at it, her mind struggling to make sense of the situation. Who sent this?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide, filled with fear and confusion. The man smiled faintly, a small, polite gesture. "Mr. Wilson. He wanted to make sure you received it." "James." Relief flooded through her, so powerful her knees nearly gave out. James sent him. Not Amanda. Not Ryan. James. She reached out, her hand trembling as she took the envelope. It was heavy, the paper thick and expensive. She looked up to thank the man, but he was already walking away, slipping back into the car with the ease of someone used to disappearing. She stood there, rooted to the spot, watching the car glide away down the street, the engine a soft purr against the morning stillness. Back inside her apartment, Emily sat at her tiny kitchen table, the envelope resting in front of her like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her name was written in bold, confident letters, the ink smooth and precise. She took a deep breath, her fingers carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a single note, written in the same elegant handwriting. "Thank you for your concern. I've decided to cancel the trip. Enclosed is something I believe you'll find useful." She frowned, her eyes scanning the rest of the envelope. Something metallic clinked against the paper, sliding into her palm. A key. It was small, plain, but attached to a silver keychain with an inscription engraved on it, "Wilshire Towers." Emily's heart stopped. Wilshire Towers. The luxury apartment complex downtown, the kind of place she could never afford in 100 lifetimes. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number, "Your new place is ready. Welcome to a fresh start. JW." The room spun around her, her mind struggling to keep up. A new place? At Wilshire Towers? But why? Why would James Wilson do this for her? She was just a maid. Just the help. He didn't owe her anything. Her fingers tightened around the key, its cold metal grounding her as her thoughts spiraled. She had warned him, risked her life to save his, but she never expected anything in return. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, because she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. But this was too much. Too generous, too surreal. Why would a billionaire care about a maid's warning? Why would he believe her at all? She stood up, pacing the room as her mind raced. This didn't make sense. There had to be more to it. Why would he go to such lengths to thank her? Why go out of his way to change her life? As the questions tumbled through her mind, a realization dawned on her, chilling her to the core. He knew. James Wilson knew she was telling the truth, not because of her words, but because he already suspected something was wrong. Amanda's betrayal wasn't a secret. Not to him. Her heart pounded, the truth crashing into her with breathtaking force. He was never going to take that trip. Not really. He was testing her, testing Amanda. And she had given him exactly what he needed. The key felt heavy in her palm, a symbol of gratitude and protection. James Wilson didn't just cancel his trip. He made sure she was safe. Hidden away in a place Amanda and Ryan could never reach her. Her life was never going to be the same. Not after this. Not after stepping out of the shadows and into his line of sight. She was no longer invisible. And that changed everything. The sun was setting over the city as Emily stood before the towering glass facade of Wilshire Towers, the key heavy in her hand. The golden light reflected off the windows, casting a warm glow that felt almost surreal. It was beautiful, too beautiful to be real. She had taken the bus here, her heart pounding with every stop, half expecting someone to appear and tell her it was all a mistake. But no one came. The key was still hers, the message on her phone still clear. Your new place is ready. Welcome to a fresh start. JW. Her fingers tightened around the key, her eyes locked on the grand entrance. How could this be her life? Just days ago, she was invisible, cleaning up after people who never even looked at her. People like James Wilson. But he had seen her. He had listened. And now everything had changed. The doorman greeted her with a polite nod, his expression respectful as he opened the door for her. It was strange, being noticed, being treated with dignity. It felt like stepping into another world, one she didn't belong to. The elevator ride was silent, the mirrored walls reflecting her nervous face, her wide eyes. Her uniform was old, her shoes scuffed, but no one seemed to care. They looked at her as if she belonged here. The apartment was on the top floor, of course. The penthouse. The same level she used to clean, wiping away fingerprints from glass surfaces, scrubbing invisible stains from marble countertops. Now, she was standing at the door, the key fitting perfectly into the lock, the door swinging open to reveal a space more beautiful than she could have imagined. It was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a painting. The furnishings were sleek, elegant, everything polished to perfection. It was spotless, untouched. A place meant for someone important. Someone like James Wilson. The realization hit her hard, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just a gift. It was a message. He was protecting her, hiding her away in a place no one could reach. A place Amanda and Ryan would never think to look. She walked slowly through the apartment, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric of the couch, the cool marble of the kitchen counter. It felt like walking through a dream. Her life had never been this beautiful, this safe. But it came with a cost. She knew that. James Wilson didn't just give her a place to live. He gave her a new identity, a new beginning, because she could never go back to her old one. Not after what she had heard. Not after she had saved his life. She stood by the window, the city lights glittering below, and wondered what James was thinking right now. Was he safe? Was he confronting Amanda? Did he know how close he came to dying? A part of her wanted to see him, to look him in the eyes and know that he was all right. But she knew better. Her role in his life was over. She had warned him, and he had listened. Now, she had to disappear, just like she always did. But this time, she wasn't running away. This time, she was being given a second chance. A fresh start. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. If you need anything, let me know. Stay safe. JW. Emily's eyes burned, tears slipping down her cheeks as she read the message. He did care. He did see her, even if just for a moment. And he was making sure she stayed safe, even from a distance. She sank down onto the plush couch, the weight of everything crashing over her. The fear, the danger, the relief, the gratitude. She had been invisible all her life, a shadow in the background. But she had stepped into the light, and it had changed everything. James Wilson wasn't just thanking her. He was saving her, just as she had saved him. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her heart full and aching. She was safe. She was seen. And for the first time, she was more than just the help. She was Emily. And that was enough. The city sparkled outside the window, a million lights twinkling against the night sky, full of promise and hope. She had a new life waiting for her, one she never dared to dream of. And she was ready to live it. Sometimes, the smallest voice can change the course of destiny. Even the invisible can become a hero. Emily's courage saved a life, and in doing so, she found her own. In risking everything, she gained more than she ever imagined. Because sometimes, being brave isn't about who you are, but about what you do. And heroes can come from the most unlikely places.